Nowadays, with society's increased reliance on computers, we need someone to make them work. Those someones are programmers. And yet, there's been an increasingly strong push from almost everyone to make coding the new anyone can cook of the modern era. The idea that everyone, no matter their profession, should be able to code at least a little bit has become increasingly more prevalent, despite the heightening ability of computers to be operated entirely from the GUI, without any knowledge of what they're really doing being necessary at all. Yes, there's something to be said about knowing what your computer is actually doing when you click on stuff, but most people don't care, and most people don't need to care. For most people, knowing more than what they need to do and how to do it is a waste of time. Because, to be honest, most people are using Windows. According to StatCounter, Windows has almost 70% global market share, with macOS at 25-ish%. And to be even more honest, most of the people I've met who use macOS don't use it for the same reasons I do. I'm a macOS user, and I'm very vocal about why I'm a macOS user. The general populace of macOS users, however, the ones making up that 25%, are probably only using macOS because it's Apple. I hate to admit that, I'm not part of that populace, but it certainly looks bad on macOS users because it's all too easy to assume that that's why they use it. I mean, I use it because it's a Unix-based operating system, which means it's friendly to developers, while also being one of the most stable operating systems out there, with the user-friendliness of Windows combined with the... Anyone know what she's on about? Don't ignore me! Most people use Windows, and the few who don't are just using macOS because it's Apple, and they're using it mostly exactly like Windows anyway. And Windows, notoriously, is sucking up all your data in the background with everything you do. And I guarantee most people don't even know it's doing it, and a lot of them who do probably don't even care. So why should they need to know a lot about computers? Why should they need to learn to code? Some ask this question, and some respond, coding teaches intuition. It's seen as a skill, and a valuable one at that. People talk about learning to code in the same breath they talk about learning a new language, like it changes your brain and the way you think and makes you a smarter, more well-rounded person. But none of that is true. Coding is not about intuition. Coding is about patience. Let me explain. I'm not trying to disprove that anyone can code. In fact, I'm essentially about to argue that that's true. What I'm arguing is that if it was for the reason people think it is, then that would actually not be true. Wait, what? Look, let's just clear up some misconceptions. Coding is difficult. No, it's not. I guarantee you, with very little tutoring, any given viewer of this video could open up VS Code, save a new file, and get their code running in minutes. Coding in itself is not difficult. I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit. Coding is a skill. There are very few actual skills to be learned with regard to coding, only best practices and language specifics. The action of coding is not a skill. Knowing to code well, maybe, but that's a whole separate skill entirely that leads up to that. Coding is intuitive. This is false by both definitions of the word, and that being false is the main reason why the previous two are false. There are two perspectives from which we could view coding that would cause a person to say it's intuitive. Someone who can't code and therefore doesn't know what goes into it, and someone who has been coding for a very long time and knows exactly what goes into it every time. From the first perspective, it's a lack of knowledge, and from the second, it's overestimating everyone else's abilities due to being at such a high level. Coding is neither an intuitive process nor intuition-based, yet everyone still seems to tote it as being a difficult, intuition-based skill. What is coding anyway? There are plenty of platforms out there designed to teach coding to absolute beginners. Yet, they're all based on this core concept of the intuition of coding, and that's where they lead learners astray. Platforms like Swift Playgrounds, Scratch, Corel the Dog, MIT App Inventor, WhilTrueLearn, Tinker, etc. all claim to teach users to code, and they don't. Platforms like these assume there to be an underlying mindset to coding that revolves around knowing how to formulate instructions. Really, all these platforms are doing is setting people up for disappointment if they actually decide to go into coding afterwards. Any of the pseudocode you write in any of these platforms is almost never applicable to the real world. Walk forward and go fishing are not coding concepts, but that's obvious. And so since that's the case, what are these platforms teaching us? The idea is to teach the non-existent intuition of coding, the ability to write instructions in a rigid way, and the mindset of coding. Can you tell I'm being super vague here? It's because I can't even figure out what it is they think they're teaching. How to put double parens at the end of statements and write in snake case? This isn't helpful. People are gonna leave thinking they can code and be woefully disappointed when they can't. How do I know this? Because I was one of those people. When I was in high school, basically since my freshman year, I wanted to go into computer science. So when I found out that my podunk rinky-dink junior-senior high school of 600 students in a town with a population of 2,000 people had a class called computer programming, I took it right away. In that class, we used Corel the dog from CodeHS, one of the platforms I mentioned earlier. I went through the whole semester acing the class, thinking I was doing pretty well for myself, but every time I tried to code something real, something I wanted to make, I couldn't do it. I couldn't get anything to work outside of the web-based Corel interpreter, and I didn't understand why. Because I was never actually taught how to code. The only thing I was taught how to do was like make Corel walk in a circle and end up at the same place he started. These platforms assume the main process of coding to be turning an end goal into instructions on how to complete it. But that's not difficult to do, and that's not what coding is about. So, what is coding? The first thing you have to do when you come up with an idea for something to code is pick a language. And this, the first step to coding something that works, is ignored by every single one of those platforms I mentioned. Once you pick a language, you need to know the syntax of that language and what methods to call to do what. Fundamental programming concepts like types, methods, objects, they work differently depending on what language you're using. Once you start coding, the biggest obstacle you'll run into with regard to coding side effects. The real skill you need to learn to be able to be an effective programmer is understanding the wonkiness of the language you're using. Truly understanding what it is every method you're calling does, that's what will hold you back if you don't understand it. Coding is unintuitive, it's unclear. The rigid instructions you're writing are only rigid because of the syntax. If you violate the syntax of the language, the compiler or interpreter just won't understand it. There's no intuitiveness to that. That's about rote memorization and trial and error. There's no coding mindset where you learn to solve problems and work out ideas. That's called problem solving, and it's an entire skill of its own, completely separate from coding. You don't need to learn to code to learn how to solve problems in a clever way. You could be the least intuitive human on Earth, but if you understand your programming language inside and out, you can code anything well and efficiently. Once you overcome the syntax errors, the null pointer exceptions, the value errors, that's when you know how to code. If you can acquire a language, even your native one, you can learn to code. So why shouldn't everyone learn to code? Well, why shouldn't everyone learn to conduct chemical experiments in a lab? Learning to code won't change how you think, just like learning a language won't. Learning a language allows you to see your own language in a new light, and learning to code allows you to see your computer in a new light. But is this really necessary? Learning to code won't make you a smarter, more intuitive person. It'll just make you more fit to be a software developer. And if you don't want to be one, you don't need that knowledge. You won't learn how to solve problems in a new way. You won't suddenly increase your cleverness and intelligence because you now know that FXML loader creates a new instance of the controller class after hours of debugging. All you'll know is you were doing everything right, but it still didn't work. And that the reason it didn't work wasn't your fault. Because coding is unintuitive. It's not about intuition. Coding is about patience. The patience to debug for hours on end, trying to figure out why the code you wrote isn't working, just because the method you're using expects a string rather than a list. Translating what you want to do into computer speak is easy, unless you're using assembly, and even then, intuition flies out the window as everything you want to do is locked behind caller saved and callee saved registers. There's no intuition to be found here. No one has ever written code and found it to be natural. And I'm not talking about the process of translating what you want to do into computer instructions. I mean, if you know how to talk to an autistic person and give them instructions on what to do, then you know how to talk to a computer. That's not the difficult part. And I'm not trying to compare autistic people to computers. I'm just, can you tell I'm going off script here? I feel very strongly about this. I've slaved away for hours on end at coding projects just because nobody gives me good specifications as to what types something is expecting, and this wouldn't be necessary in any other profession. Honestly, I am 2 years into my computer science degree, and I don't want to do this anymore. I used to have a passion for this, but I've worked on too many project teams where nobody's doing any work except for me. I want to do something like voice acting. I mean, I have a real passion for that, or something where I'd get to travel a lot. I so badly want to travel across the world. I have a passion for linguistics. I could do something in that. So for the love of curly braces, don't forget the semicolon at the end of your lines. And if you're not a programmer, don't feel pressured to learn to code. It's frustrating, it's unintuitive, it's arduous, it's rage-inducing. Inconsistent use of tabs and spaces in indentation. Oh, my head.
Your time's up, Nicole. Come with me.
What? Who are you? Where am I? What's going on?
I guess we're doing this the hard way.
No, wait.